Policing in the UK is very holistic with a wide base of skill sets. Policing in other jurisdictions can be very hampered because you are tasked to go and do something. I've been around a lot of police services and a lot of governance structures, and I would say out of everyone at the time that I was serving, certainly the Metropolitan Police and the UK Policing Service was certainly the best one for going on and making something else out of myself. The value of a police officer within the United Kingdom is vast. It's certainly six figures.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Cognitas Global Podcast, and I'm joined this week by one of my friends, Mr. Mark Nuttall. Mark, welcome.
It's an honour, Lawrie, to be here on your podcast. Fantastic.
Thank you, Mark. Now, Mark, I'll introduce you in your formal role at the moment. You are the chair of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management for the UAE at the moment. You're based in Dubai. We're going to talk about risk management later on, but I think we need to go way back first, Mark. And Mark, can I just say, first of all, I think you're very smartly dressed today. You'll notice I'm very casual. So I can only apologise for my lack of sartorial elegance here.
New Scotland Yard's finest, Lawrie. Yeah, letting the side down, man.
What I would say, mate, is I'm really pleased you left the violin case like aside. That's all I can say. But
well, I need that. I'm in Dubai, Lawrie. I'm in Dubai. You know what I mean?
Well, we move on to perhaps more serious things. So, Mark, you and I both shared a career in the police. In fact, I think I probably was in there slightly longer than you. You left to take up opportunities elsewhere. And one of the things I want to do really on this podcast is, perhaps give some helpful information to people that might be transitioning out of careers that we had. There's lots of challenges. It's not for everybody. There's lots of things that we need to do to prepare, and there's lots of things that we find when we've left that aren't quite as we thought they would be when we leave. We were both financial investigators at the Metropolitan Police way back. You retired when, Mark?
2016.
And how long did you do in the Met before you decided that you wanted to create opportunities elsewhere?
Half of my service. So I did 15 years in Metropolitan Police Service, which was... It took a big operation at the end to finally kill my want and enthusiasm to continue on. It wasn't in regards to the people. It wasn't even in regards to the job. It was more in relation to some big political things that were going on with a certain thing that I was running at the time. And my want a little bit as well to help my family sustain, because the job doesn't pay in today's economy, whereas it might have done previously. And I'm one of those that had a job house as well in a previous guise. And all those trinkets being a police officer went.
Yeah, I mean, they did cut all the allowances, obviously, and things change, like many, tightening up in many public sector jobs. But I know, like many people, actually, and because we had a particular skill, things are opening up. I mean, the financial investigation was quite new, although the legislation has been in for some time. Legislation came in 2002 to change the landscape, and we had to be professionally qualified, which allowed some of us that wanted to look outside perhaps to go for opportunities that were going to pay more, perhaps created a sense of more adventure if there could be, and just really changed the way that people wanted to live, to be fair, because the job did present its challenges. We both saw good times and bad times, and it was very rewarding. I look back with great fondness, but, I look at many people that left the job, think, I didn't really want to take the chance. I guess I've been in there for too long. If I'd probably have had a much reduced pension. So for me, I was stuck. But for people like you, I sort of envied really and made the leap, and dare I say, successfully. When you left, where did you go?
So I started out in a consultancy, my own consultancy. So before I left the job, I learned how to do business. So while I was still in it, I was in a specialist unit. I was running a certain operation out of that specialist unit. And that operation allowed me a very, very deep insight into global business practices on a vast scale with thousands of companies and entities. Okay, it might have been recidivist practices, but it was still business practices. And that then took me into kind of opening a physical space, a gymnasium, fitness industry in central London. I started it from scratch, absolutely nothing. Got out a small business loan for that, and successfully managed to achieve a good business out of it. And then I sold it off, got it merged and acquired. But it meant that I learnt all of the foundational business practices for a physical entity, which is start from scratch, buy equipment, rent out a space, all of that formation stuff, opening business accounts, opening VAT registration, accounting, marketing, search engine optimization, business development, partnering, joint ventures. And all of those elements as well, I'd learned from my background in the police service, because the police teaches you communication, negotiation, and being able to deal with people. And that is a core skill that I think a lot of people who are leaving the job leave off their resume, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah. Well, my first comment is I'm rather disappointed that you closed your gym, because after 2 knee operations after the last 12 months and a bit of sedentary activity over COVID, I probably could do losing a few pounds. I'm making the effort now.
You don't want me training you. You don't want me training you, Lawrie.
You know what? Someone told me about you in pink lycra, and I've got to say, the old green goddess, the pink goddess stuff, not for me. However, you're right. I think the communication side of it, a lot of people leave the job and they don't really understand what skills they possess. Unfortunately, people may not get the help that they need to transition. I don't know. There are resettlement courses, but the biggest thing really is the fact that, for those that have been in it, disciplined, all the on-time stuff, unprofessional person, all that goes without saying and is really part of what you should be doing in a new job. But the communication skills, the writing skills, articulation, dealing with people as a commodity, all of those are very, very great areas for experience in developing any additional skills you've got. And clearly, you develop your business skills. The gym went, where did you go after that? Because you've ended up in the financial world. Eventually, of course.
Yeah. So I kept, this is all, I think what's important to mention about being a police officer within the UK, because this is going out to an international audience anyway, is that policing in the UK is very, very, very holistic with a wide base of skill sets. Policing in other jurisdictions can be very hampered because you are tasked to go and do something. There's always the foundation of response policing, kind of et al., in a lot of jurisdictions, but you're very pigeonholed and limited. Whereas in the UK, and I've been in Interpol, that, Lawrie, we'll come on to that maybe later. I've been around a lot of police services and a lot of police forces and governance structures. And I would say out of everyone at the time that I was serving, certainly, the Metropolitan Police and the UK Policing Service was certainly the best one for my development of skills and for going on and making something else out of myself, because I learned a lot, and it enables you to not just be, one singular strand. You've got to be a law practitioner. You've got, as you mentioned, Lawrie, as kind of that additional tool that we've got when we became additionally powered confiscators, financial investigators, within all the rest of the tools that we had. We also, so there was surveillance, there was response, there was a whole load of different things within UK policing that we also had skill sets in. And that financial investigation piece is one of the rare ones, especially during the money seizure process of going in and being audible within the court system. You don't get that anymore. You're not able to do that as a standard police officer. When I decided to leave, I said to the consultancy, I got a kind of position within a financial institution of which I did a risk remediation process on that. Certain institution, it was up in the north of England, quite a large retail organisation, some corporate business in there, that had gone through some troubles. So I did that, completed that. I went over to the Caribbean, did a similar exercise in Jamaica for the Independent Commission of Investigations. It's something I can't remember what the name of it is now. Did a similar exercise, came over here to Abu Dhabi, over in the UAE, trained senior leadership in utilising kind of Hydra, doing development courses, etc. here, as well as giving them an inclusive understanding of what juries are meant to do, because they don't have that here. It's a judge, fantastic news. And other caveats of doing that type of training. I know that we want to make this bouncy, so I won't go into it too much. And then jobs in Europe, jobs in the UK, and jobs in Australia as well, all around the world, really. Didn't spend too much time in the United Kingdom, thankfully. And as a result of that, what happened is I also had kind of subcontractors and a whole heap of other people who were working for me. And again, I sold that book of business on, quite an extensive book of business, because networking, word of mouth, being able to get out there, being able to go to just having the I've got a family, okay, yeah, just having the nuance to get out there, to go into the world, to not be afraid, to take risks yourself, educated and sustain risk, but risk no matter what, is a big part of leaving the job. And if you kind of want to get into statement taking when you finish the job and you just want some pin money, fine. But if you actually want to make a career and have that level of responsibility that you've had in the job, then really you need to be on a higher plane. And I think a lot of people pitch quite low when they leave the police service, not understanding their value. And the value of a police officer within the United Kingdom is vast. It's certainly six figures, and kind of not under that. It's the things that it can do far beyond a lot of kind of corporate individuals that I've met during my time. That's not kind of distilling their skill sets, but a lot of the time they're focused on one task or one thing or one pillar of business, whereas police officers just do everything. And they take on a great deal of responsibility to do that as well.
Yeah, the thing that I found, Mark, is that not everybody can transition into the world that we worked in. To be fair, you've got to have a certain sense of business acumen, particularly if you are starting your own business. Many people are successful as subject matter experts.
Yeah,
I think there is a view that you can just leave a public profession and automatically become some sort of expert or consultants, and the streets are paved with gold and all the rest of it. No. And some have survived out of that on a network for a year and then drop off. But I think business has also changed, where many people need the coverage of a larger organization now to support them in the way their procurement and all that sort of stuff goes. But I think most importantly, those that do survive are the ones that see the need to develop themselves through a continuous professional development process, driven by themselves ordinarily. And I guess I turn to you and say, how did you've gone from financially investigating the job, you've had your training, and then you've opened your gym, but then you've gone back into a financial world where demands are tough, standards are high, people want their pound of flesh, working all sorts of hours, and consequences are significant if you get it wrong. So you need to be on the money, as it were. How did you develop yourself in order to acquire those skills around risk management and all the things that you've done since you left then?
Yeah,
I mean, many you pick up on the way, of course, but there are stuff.
I mean, kind of risk and crisis management is ingrained within us all in a police service setting, and especially if you're busy, especially if you're in somewhere like central London, or south of the river, should I say? But yeah, a lot of core skills are made within there. Before I was in the job, I certainly learned kind of the hard way. For 6 months, I was homeless before I came into the job. I had nothing. I was literally living on the streets in Roman Road in Bethnal Green, with kind of post being redirected to my familial home elsewhere. But I know what it's like to go from absolutely zero, nothing, less than that, to kind of being in the position that I'm in now. And during the job, I understood what real risk looked like, what it could be faced with, and what the repercussions of those real risks might be, because of the things that I did previous to the job as well. The job taught me, as I said at the start of this, communication and negotiation. I didn't have that before. I had kind of communication from being a friendly northerner and being, doing things previous to that. But in terms of negotiation and communication, that was a key thing. To go into business, that is the main thing. It's about negotiating, because when you do business, as you know yourself, Lawrie, you've got to do business development, no matter where you are in the chain, no matter whether you're CEO or whether you're down at the bottom of the peg. Business development is the core thing, because without that, you don't have any business. So you need to know about marketing, you need to know where the business is going, you need to know about strategies, and all within that is levels of risk. So I'm a project management professional. I've got a PMI qualification. It's not just qualification with the PMI. You do an exam, obviously, but it's about the things that you've done before. So all those skills and jobs and all the things that I've done previous to getting that qualification bulked up a number of hours for me, because I've run projects, I've run programs, I've run portfolios, not just in civilian life, but in the job as well, because we all forget that actually when we're running investigations, projects, you have a start, you have a middle, you have an end, you have budgets, you have cycles, you have staff, you have an immense amount of things, communication pathways, use of processes, use of programs, use of software, it goes on and on and on and on. And when I had kind of the last, say from probably about 2011 up to finishing the job, I was running, one of your colleagues was with me for some of that time. I was running quite a complex operation, and I ended up completely running that operation with many staff within it, and actually a devolved budget to me that I was dealing with vendors in relation to. So I learned a lot of that, as well as running a gym at the same time. And then obviously I ran my own business, evolved from that. Then I went on to run a consultancy. Well, that's a different ballgame altogether. And then I was international. International, you've got to understand about cultures. Thankfully, I've been in London. London's a melting pot of cultures. You understand how to really be a respectful individual, to be able to utilise that communication, negotiation pathway skill set. And in relation to kind of my next elevation from there, I got called up via Interpol to go and work in Interpol as a kind of officer, in inverted commas, but part of the executive staff. And that was, again, a different level. I was on the geopolitical scene from day one, dealing with ministers, dealing with country leaders, dealing with, big law enforcement entities and regional entities in the United Nations. That takes you on to, again, another gradient from all the skill sets that you've built up over time.
I've been retired 13 years now. I've worked in 38 countries and been humbled by much of what I've seen, but learnt some interesting skills and knowledge in that process that allows you to do exactly what you say, particularly if you're looking at business development. You have to communicate and articulate yourself on many, many levels in many situations. If I'd have said 20 years ago, would I have been dealing with the stuff I'm dealing with now around contracts and procurement and knowledge, I would have said, never in a million years. And it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, on that journey that we both come on, and you're right, you pick all this up as you go along. You do get professional qualifications where you need to, because, it's a bit like my own organisation. If anybody says to me what qualifies you to train, or any of my staff or subject matter experts, they need to be able to say this. And, that's why everybody in my organisation has those qualifications, because you need that credibility, you need integrity in the way that you operate. But I think you were last in Singapore. You're still working for a big organisation as well as a director.
Correct. Yeah.
But let's talk about something that is very familiar to both of us, and this is risk management and corporate risk nowadays. Now, it's relatively new to me compared to the time that you've been doing it, but we've been delivering crisis management exercises and engaged in risk management or crisis framework stuff now for probably three or more years. It's interesting the way the threat landscape is changing. I mean, cyber threats, huge, from state actor threats to entrepreneurs working as activists. I think I was reading something like 156 million last night have recently been paid in ransomware demands. So you've got this perpetual issue with companies: do we pay, do we not pay, all this sort of stuff. How do you see it? Yeah. Well, and actually there was even an article about an organisation that was very keen to establish its credentials in terms of its integrity by trying to demonstrate that the data have been destroyed. Can you believe that? And ironically, I was at an event in I think in the Isle of Man where they were talking. There was one consultant who was talking about doing due diligence on the integrity of a cyber activist group, around all this stuff. It's just crazy nowadays. I mean, anyway, how do you see it changing? I mean, one of the biggest things for me, and we've come across this right from education to corporate stuff, is that the culture is changing. I think a lot of organizations are realizing it's not a question of if, it's when. There's been many dusty crisis management plans that have sat on shelves with organizations saying it's never going to happen to us, or it's too expensive for us to implement precautionary and preventative measures.
My friend.
And all of a sudden, things are happening, and regulators are coming in and finding people 20 million because they can't, they've not secured their own data when it's lost, and all sorts of stuff. So how do you see that general landscape? How do you see the cultural change, and also the responsibility that organizations now need to take to start proving that they're capable of resilience, other than by having to do it as a mandatory thing through regulation or otherwise?
It's mandatory. It's got to be mandatory now. I was at the United Nations World Investment Forum about 3 weeks ago now. There's going to be standards pushed out by IOSCO in relation to kind of a sustainability standard framework, and I'll kind of send you the link after so it can be included in this podcast.
Can I just hold you there with one observation?
Of course you can. Yeah.
TMA. Familiar? Too many acronyms.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what IOSCO is for the benefit of our listeners?
Right. Okay. So it's essentially the international standard organization. It's like a standard setter. Okay. It creates as a governing geopolitical organization. It creates standards that must be followed. Let's go with that. I don't often use that phrase because a lot of countries don't need to take things on that get sent through via FATF or other organisations. It's a standard, but they only really send things through when it needs or must be followed. So they've created this standard framework that was recently released, like say at the United Nations World Investment Forum, and during that, it was the session for sustainable stock exchanges. So all the stock exchanges have now had to sign up to this, which means that the publicly traded companies, the financial institutions that are basically governed a lot of the time by those big players in the stock exchange market, because let's face it, they are, and also then the trickle-down effect on small, medium enterprises must be followed. And as part of that, it's a big risk management exercise in terms of their full supply chain output, which means that essentially you've now got to do risk management a la carte from a environmental, social, and let's put corporate in front of governance part of it, from an overall governing process and a kind of overall governance approach. Because what's happened is that they've put these things in place now, or putting them in place, because $7 trillion USD has been going a year to a lot of the developed countries, ironically, to get their house in order in terms of sustainable processes and renewables, etc., in terms of the sustainable development goals that a lot of countries have signed up to. Okay, and very few that haven't. They've got to do that and got to meet that, but they're not going to meet it because the money has gone elsewhere. 7 trillion a year, a lot of money. A lot of the bulk of that has gone to developed countries, which questions are being asked. And then the rest of it have gone to developing countries. The emissions haven't decreased, so the money has gone elsewhere. So as a result of that, the investors, of which there are a lot of private investors into the 7 trillion, as well as governmental kind of sovereign wealth funds, are now going, these need to be in place because all of our money is now disappearing. So it's all driven by money. The reason why businesses don't do it is because of money. And the only reason when businesses do it is because somebody's pointing at them with fines for money. So it all revolves around the cost piece. And the problem is with compliance. Okay, so compliance function is usually a tick box function within an organisation if they are forced to do it by a regulator. And in that, they will try and limit the amount of cost spend given to that certain function. As police officers, and you know it as much as I do, Lawrie, is that when we were across the other side of the desk, away from financial institutions, certainly the general consensus was, must be chucking loads of money at this. It's a bank, and they must have this, and they must have that, and they must be able to do this. No, is definitely the case. I think that once you get out of the job, you see a lot of that. If you gravitate towards kind of this risk management, compliance, regulatory, whatever field, it all kind of falls under one axis, because anybody that's in compliance is basically kind of two steps over the compliance and the regulators. It's typically criminal legislation that's driving it. However, a lot of the times they forget that the police are there. You think about the regulator first and ticking the box. That's where the risk management portfolio comes in. And when you're talking about risk management et al. For a business, it can be actually a big profit driver for the business, because you can reduce some of the negative risk, but push the positive risk, i.e. doing things in certain countries that you might not have done so before, but you could do if you had the requisite knowledge and you were willing to change your risk tolerance. I hope I didn't witter too much, but that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, so in essence, things like ESG, so the environment, social governance, and you said corporate governance, are now starting, I think, to provoke action and responsibility by organisations. So, for instance, next year,
correct,
I think a new EU directive around ESG bites, and although it bites in the EU, or bite in relation to companies that have business outside of Europe as well. And when you look at the relationship between crisis management and ESG, and if we just look at ESG very simply as measures now where an organisation has to demonstrate that they are caring for the environment and they have plans to reduce emissions, that they have social responsibility, and also they have good governance. So they're looking at supply chains, the way that they manage their welfare of their workers, all of these things to demonstrate transparency, so that they can demonstrate that effective governance and all the rest of it to their shareholders, to their investors, to their stakeholders, and so forth.
Exactly.
That's going to drive a lot of crisis management now, isn't it?
Massively. ESG, and it was CSR before, and it was acronym before that, corporate social responsibility, etc. All of these things are just a way of living life, a way of doing business. You're either a bad actor and a recidivist or you're not. Okay. So do you set up are you a foreign state-owned enterprise? And when you open your oil refinery in Ghana or wherever else that might be, are you going to pay your staff a local living wage? Are you going to do things in a renewable way? Are you going to utilise local trucking and import-exports? Are you going to give a good inflationary rate and foreign exchange rate? Are you going to be a good actor there? And are you going to invest in the local community and the building itself? And what does that look like? And all these other matters. And the local financial markets. Or are you going to be kind of a bad, grey, recidivist actor and do it exactly the opposite way? Are you going to bring in staff externally because you want a presence there and you want to affect change within the nation or the community or whatever for your own particular purposes? Are you going to build it in a really either slapdash way or without any renewable focus? Are you going to treat the local community as either scum or not pay them enough, of which then there are internal insider risks as well in terms of theft, terrorism, whatever crime you want to place into that? Not saying local communities do that, but everybody knows if you don't get a living wage, you seek it elsewhere. So loads of things in that, and it's ESG has been tainted for particular people's own profession, if you will. So they'll go, right, environmental. what we'll do is we'll talk about fluffy trees and oceans. Truly, ESG is about doing good business. The reason why the environment is a mess is because businesses just haven't been operating in a sustainable, renewable, in a fashion that is good, or a good acting fashion, should I say.
And of course, arguably,
crisis management. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and well, not even arguably. I mean, and it cannot be anything other than a good thing if you're protecting the people that work for you, you're protecting the environment, which we know is very much under attack, and you're demonstrating good governance. I mean, look, if you're a shareholder, if you're an investor, if you want inward investment, and perhaps maybe an interesting analogy, perhaps is we're working in Saudi Arabia at the moment, and the 2030 vision is a really interesting thing because they've got these huge projects like Neom, this walled city that's 174 kilometers long, 500 meters high, 250 meters wide, with a population of 9 million, no cars, self-sustainable, all green. And it's actually the Crown Prince's, within that, his vision, 2030 vision, that's his one thing, is ESG. So when I was out there recently, there are organisations out there that, of course, it's got established ESG practices and departments, but ESG is very much on the agenda in terms of bringing in expertise to help them with that. And on the other hand, also, when I come back to the relationship with crisis management, crisis management and the exercises and the training and everything that you can do to prepare is, again, demonstrating to your shareholders, investors, and anybody else that what you're doing is trying to maintain the integrity, transparency, the business, to ensure that it's going to good governance, ensure it's going to run properly, preventative measures against any crisis and so forth. So that's a very interesting environment that we're working in at the moment. And that, that is applying right across the whole industry, not just for the vision, but everything out in Saudi. So
it is.
I mean, I've seen the cultural change in terms of the work that we're doing for organizations that previously have had that plan on the shelf and now realize, look, let's be honest. The Manchester bombing inquiry was a good example of how that has driven many things, including the new Martin's Law that's coming out, that is going to require premises to demonstrate they've got a counter-terrorism policy, in public spaces and all this sort of stuff. I mean, there were many people seen and organisations and police falling short in that. So, again, out of that comes the need to demonstrate that you can deal with something effectively, because let's face it, the world is not becoming any safer as we move through. And no doubt it moves in cycles, but we are continuing under the threat of terrorism and all sorts of stuff. And you look at things that are happening in the Middle East and the consequences now. So, but I guess, Mark, to sort of sum up really your overview, how do you see that? How do you see that cultural change happening or not happening? And what responsibility do you see that organizations have to take and boards have to take in order to move towards that ESG, satisfying ESG and the whole philosophy of maintaining that business?
I think I'll come back to comms again, communication. What I find in a lot of organizations that have bad crisis management, no crisis management, or crisis management policies, as you referred to earlier, dusty, on the shelf, just left to mourn. Actually, good crisis management doctrine, but not practiced, not trained upon, left to wither. That's what we saw in COVID-19. Everybody knows how to deal with SARS, respiratory diseases, outbreaks, all that business. Everybody knows how to do that. Been doing it for years and years and years. But unfortunately, nobody had trained, nobody understood. People had left, people had retired. Nobody had a clue anymore because legacies and lessons weren't learned. Okay. What I often find in businesses that have poor crisis management or any kind of management is lack of communication. No communication systems, no overall project management, no program management or portfolio management, no use of any modern systems. If they have any systems, it's on an Excel spreadsheet and within a siloed unit. And the business itself might have an ISO 31000 following for risk management. Might be able to do that, but actually it hasn't followed it itself because it hasn't followed the holistic pathways of the business and disseminated it i.e. the COSO framework and cube. And if it doesn't do that, then you may as well tear that book up in the first place or burn it, because nobody is utilising it, nobody's practicing it, nobody's engaging with it. And it just becomes something that every now and again gets brought up in a meeting somewhere, or maybe a training every now and again, or at e-learning. Who actually learns from e-learning? I have no idea. But all of these things, all of these processes via pure communication, the conflicts that we've got at the moment, pure communication globally. Some of them are geopolitically engineered, but it's pure communication and a lack of understanding, a lack of cultural understanding, a lack of understanding how things work and pivot. I saw something the other day both me and you were within the compliance, financial, whatever communities, as well as all the rest of the skill sets. Somebody talking again about halal and informal value transfers. Step out of the United Kingdom, my friend, and you will see that is the main course and travel of funds throughout villages, throughout towns, throughout townships, globally. So don't put that as your number one red flag, because it's these things. It's a lack of communication, a lack of knowledge. And when you were talking earlier on about knowledge engagement, being able to soak it up, going and doing qualifications, courses that aren't just qualifications and courses, but they're a kind of a linchpin mechanism for all the experience that you've had, and then you quantify that with a qualification. And that to me is the great value of things like ACESs, so security institutes, certified protection professional that I have as well, because I've been in security before I was a police officer. I was in security. I was in for a little small amount of time the military. I've lived on the street. I've been a bouncer. I've done this, that, and the other, and then I became a police officer. And that, in definition, is security in its main. And all these other things, it's about confirming your experience level and your qualification level. If you had been speaking to me now at the start of my career, you probably wouldn't have even understood what I'm saying. I was a vast northerner, you know what I mean, that had worked in London and other sectors of the United Kingdom. I before I learned how to engage with the court, engage with people et al. Being a bouncer, you didn't have to really do that. Being actually engaged in the community and being a police officer allowed me to do a lot of things. So anybody that's looking to leave the police service, don't devalue those things. They are the main linchpin of being in business, or being going out to get another occupation. Communication is key. And I say this no matter where I go, and people think it's a bit fluffy sometimes, but it's not. It's the main thing of being successful in business.
Well, I think having identified what era that suit came from, which is clearly your bouncer era, it may be a good time to wrap up this conversation. And Mark, I just want to say that hopefully, anybody that's listening to this that might be looking to transition from not necessarily the police, but any job into this strange world that we work in, may have picked up some tips. Consultancy is very, very difficult. Consultancy is hard nowadays. I think the biggest thing for me is, if I was to say to somebody, decide what you want to do, train, go on a path of continued professional development or vocational pathway learning, and blend your previous experience with your ongoing experience and just focus on that, really. And I guess if we look back, that's really what both of us have probably done, along with many other people. And I probably should just finish by saying as well that although we do criticize organizations that put their people and their organization at risk because they're not looking at their crisis management framework and their risk registers and everything as they should do, there are, of course, many organizations that do this properly, that are protecting their people properly, that do train and exercise regularly. And, I'm pleased to say that, as I say, we're seeing that shift in the culture now, and I'm pleased to say part of that as well. But hopefully, Mark, in your job as the chair of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management, you will be pushing that message throughout the region. And I guess we look forward to the next time our paths will cross. And
thank you. And
soon.
what I would say before I disappear is keep doing it poorly until I come along, and then you can start doing it well, because that's where I need the money from, guys, please. Yeah.
Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day.
Thank you, Lawrie.
Cheers.